The number sat on my screen for a long time before I let myself believe it. $10,500,000. I had refreshed the page 3 times. My hands were shaking so badly that I knocked my coffee mug off the desk, and I just watched it fall in slow motion. Watched it shatter on the hardwood floor. And I didn't move to clean it up. I just sat there, staring at that number. And for the first time in 11 years, I started to cry. Not because I was sad. Because I was done. Done with the 18-hour days. Done with the ramen dinners while my logistics fleet ran routes I was too exhausted to track. Done with being the invisible one, the daughter who worked while everyone else lived. My name is Elena. I was 34 years old, and I had just sold my company for more money than my entire family had ever seen combined. And the very first thing I wanted to do was call my mother and my sister and tell them we were free. That instinct, that reflex, is the thing I want you to pay attention to, because it tells you everything about who I was before that day, and everything about what I was about to learn. I picked up my phone and started to dial my mother's number. That's when Julian sat down beside me. My husband didn't look the way I expected him to look. I expected excitement, maybe even the same disbelief I was feeling. Instead, his face was completely still, calm in a way that felt deliberate, like a man who had already thought through something I hadn't reached yet. He put his hand over my phone, gently, and he looked at me for a long moment before he spoke. "Call them," he said. "But tell them the company is gone. Tell them the money is frozen in a patent lawsuit and you're bankrupt. Tell them you don't have a single cent left." I stared at him. I thought he was joking. The smile I was waiting for never came. "Trust me," he said. "One conversation. That's all I'm asking. Let the truth come out before you hand anything over." I had been with Julian for 6 years. In 6 years, he had never once steered me wrong. He was the one who had believed in my logistics idea before it had a name. He was the one who sat across from me in a diner booth at midnight, drawing route maps on napkins when I had exactly $400 in my checking account. He had earned every ounce of the trust I was holding in that moment, so I pressed the speakerphone button with a trembling finger, and I told my mother and my sister that I had lost everything. What happened next is the part of this story that I want you to really hear. Not just the facts of it, but the feeling of it, the way a whole life's worth of assumptions can dissolve in under 60 seconds. My mother, Yvonne, did not ask if I was okay. She did not say, "Come home, honey." She did not say, "We'll figure it out together." She did not say anything that a mother is supposed to say when her child calls her in crisis. After a silence that lasted exactly long enough to confirm my worst fears, she asked if my name was still on the family cottage deed. "I need to know," she said, her voice already shifting from warm to businesslike. "Whether the bank can come after our property, because of your mistakes." That was her word. Mistakes. A decade of my life, compressed into a word that sounded like something you did when you forgot to carry the one on a math test. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from my sister Sienna. "Don't even think about asking to crash here. My boyfriend doesn't do charity cases." I read it twice. I put the phone face down on the desk. And for the first time, I understood exactly why Julian had asked me to make that call. Over the next 3 days, I stopped being a daughter and started being a researcher. I went back through my bank records not to count what I had, but to understand what I had given. The paper trail was patient and damning. $60,000 for Sienna's wedding. A destination event with a 5-tier cake and a custom dress she had shown me on Pinterest with a note that said, "This is the one. Elena. This is my dream." The marriage lasted 6 months. The debt stayed with me for 3 years. $15,000 for my mother's roof. I wired it on a Tuesday. The following Saturday, Julian found photos on her social media. Yvonne, on the deck of a luxury cruise ship somewhere in the Mediterranean, a champagne flute in her hand, the afternoon sun turning the water gold behind her. She had never fixed the roof. I had funded a vacation she never mentioned taking. And then there were the smaller amounts, the car insurance payments, the utility bailouts, the just until next month requests that never had a next month attached to them. I had been running a private welfare system for my family for a decade, and I had called it love. What I was beginning to understand was that they had never called it that. For them, I was infrastructure. I was a resource with a familiar face, and the moment I told them that resource had dried up, they didn't grieve a daughter or a sister. They started looking for the backup supply. On day 3, I drove to my mother's house wearing a faded college hoodie and a pair of jeans I'd pulled from a donation bin. I needed to see it for myself, whatever was left of the family I had spent my whole life trying to earn. The driveway told me something before I even got to the door. Sienna's car, the one I had made the down payment on, was parked at an angle like she lived there. A delivery truck was unloading a marble bistro, set for the back patio. Inside, the kitchen smelled like expensive steak and garlic butter. Sienna was sitting at the table wearing the $4,000 cashmere coat I had given her for Christmas. She looked at me the way you look at someone you've decided is no longer worth the performance of politeness. She pushed a plate of dry toast crusts across the table and told me I could have the leftovers. Because, and I want you to remember this line, starving is kind of the bankruptcy aesthetic. I sat down. I looked defeated. I played every note of the role Julian and I had rehearsed, and then I set my iPad on the counter, face up, with a document glowing on the screen labeled Offshore Recovery Confidential. I said I needed to use the bathroom to wash up. I left the room. And from the hallway, through the crack of the door, I watched. They didn't even wait for the sound of the bathroom door to click shut. Yvonne and Sienna moved toward that iPad the way people move toward something they've already decided belongs to them. Their faces weren't worried. They weren't thinking about me at all. Their eyes were bright with that specific, predatory light that only appears when someone believes they've found a shortcut to money they feel they deserve. They photographed every page of the document with their phones, whispering fast and sharp, already calculating their cut. They thought they had found my secret. They thought I had been hiding money from them, and now they had the proof they needed to take it. They didn't know that every tap on that screen was being recorded on a sync device in our home office, where Julian was sitting quietly, watching them hand us everything we needed. What Julian saw on that synced screen the following morning changed the nature of everything. Sienna wasn't just reviewing files. She had navigated to the IRS website and typed a very specific phrase into the search bar. IRS Whistleblower Reward Form 211. Let me explain what that means, for those who aren't familiar. The IRS has a program that rewards individuals who report tax fraud. If the government recovers funds based on that tip, the whistleblower can receive up to 30% of the recovered amount. Sienna had done the math. If she could convince the IRS that the offshore recovery file represented hidden, untaxed income $10 million, in her mind her cut could be north of $3 million. She was prepared to file a federal report. She was prepared to put me in a cell if it meant she could keep her coat and her steak dinners. Julian didn't get angry. He just reached for his phone and called a man named Mr. Vance, a high-stakes financial consultant who specialized, as Julian put it, in toxic assets. What Vance found when he dug into our family's history was something neither Yvonne nor Sienna had thought about in years. My mother had opened a shell company more than a decade ago for a catering business that never launched. The entity had been dormant ever since, but it wasn't clean. It was sitting beneath $2 million in unpaid state-backed loans and a full decade of accumulated property tax liens. The company was a financial sinkhole, and it had my mother's name on the door. Vance reached out to Yvonne posing as a neutral investigator. He told her that to qualify for the whistleblower reward, she needed to formally demonstrate that she was the active director of the business entities associated with Elena's offshore accounts. The reward, he implied, was substantial, life-changing. My mother, Yvonne, a woman who had spent 30 years surviving on the belief that the right signature could unlock the right door, grabbed a pen without reading a word of the fine print. She signed a legal affidavit, under penalty of perjury, confirming herself as the active director and sole controlling officer of a company drowning in $2,100,000 of debt. She thought she was signing herself into my fortune. She had actually just signed herself into the single worst financial decision of her life. 2 days later, Julian sent them both a formal notice. Final asset distribution was taking place at a private storage facility. He used precisely the kind of cold, official language that makes people believe they are about to receive something they are owed. They arrived dressed for an occasion. Yvonne in her best pearls. Sienna with a designer portfolio tucked under her arm like she was attending a closing. They walked down that corridor like women who had already decided how they were going to spend the money. I was standing at the far end of the hallway with Julian at my side, and next to me stood Mr. Henderson, a senior recovery officer from the bank. Yvonne looked past my face entirely and smiled at Henderson. She told him she was there to claim her interest in the offshore holdings she had reported. She said it the way you say something you've rehearsed in the mirror. Henderson didn't smile back. He pulled a thick stack of blue-bound legal documents from his briefcase and asked my mother to confirm the signature on the affidavit she had signed 48 hours earlier, the one where she declared, under oath, that she was the active director and sole controlling officer. Yvonne nodded enthusiastically. She was practically glowing. Henderson's expression didn't change. He told her that by legally reactivating her status as director, she had assumed full personal liability for $2,100,000 in defaulted loans and unpaid property tax liens, effective immediately. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. I watched my mother's hand go to her throat. I watched her fingers close around her pearls. I watched Sienna's face go from expectant to blank, to something I can only describe as the specific horror of realizing the floor you were standing on was never solid. They hadn't found my fortune. They had claimed my debt, and the bank was already moving to liquidate. 48 hours later, I pulled up to the family home for the last time. A foreclosure sign had been staked into the front lawn, its red letters stark against the hedges I had paid a landscaping crew to maintain for the better part of a decade. Sienna was sitting on a packing crate in the middle of the foyer, her cashmere coat draped over her shoulders like something that had already given up. She reached out her hand when she saw me. She asked for a loan, just $10,000, she said. Just enough to get them into a rental. I looked at her for a long moment. I'm bankrupt, remember? I said. I don't do charity cases. I walked past her into the kitchen. My mother was standing at the sink, her back to me, staring at a wall that used to display her collection of fine china. She didn't turn around. She said she couldn't believe I would do this to my own flesh and blood. I didn't argue. I didn't explain the affidavit or the $2 million or any of it. I simply reached into the small ceramic jar on the counter and retrieved the only thing in that house that had ever genuinely belonged to me. My grandmother's old silver watch. The one she had pressed into my hand when I was 9 years old and told me that time was the only thing in life nobody could take back. Before I left, I walked to the backyard. My mother's dog, Buster, a 12-year-old golden retriever with a graying muzzle and gentle clouded eyes, was tied to the porch railing, whining softly at the chaos around him. I knew Yvonne had made no arrangements for him. He was another loose end in a life that was being rapidly dismantled. I untied his leash and led him to my car, where my neighbor Mrs. Gable was waiting. I handed her his blanket and a check for $5,000 drawn on a business account that no court order would ever reach, enough to cover his care for the rest of his life. Then I got into the driver's seat, adjusted the mirror, and drove away. The final court documents arrived on a Tuesday morning. 3 months later, Yvonne was sentenced to 4 years in state prison, a conviction built on the fraudulent assumption of liabilities and the attempted tax fraud she had so eagerly tried to pin on me. The court ordered restitution of $2,142,000. With no assets remaining, the bank seized everything. The cottage, the vehicles, the jewelry I had given her for her 50th birthday. Sienna avoided prison, but she was barred from holding any fiduciary role for 15 years. Her professional reputation in the finance world was finished before it had fully started. Last I heard, she was working at a dry cleaner 3 towns over, still telling people I had stolen her life. 3 months after sentencing, I received a letter on yellow legal paper. The handwriting was cramped and uneven. Yvonne had written to tell me the food was making her ill, and that as a mother, she deserved a second chance. She said she had done it all for the family to secure a future for both her girls. I read it once. Then I walked to the shredder, fed it through, and watched it become confetti. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel that old hot pressure in my chest that had followed me through most of my adult life. I felt something quieter and much more permanent. I felt nothing. And nothing, I have learned, is not emptiness. It is freedom. I'm writing this from my office, 60 floors above the city. The glass is cold against my hand, and the skyline stretches out in every direction, all those lights, all those people moving toward things they believe will finally make them feel like enough. I used to be one of them. I used to believe that if I cleared one more milestone, wired one more payment, showed up one more time, my mother would finally look at me and see a daughter instead of a deposit. Julian is across the room right now, reviewing a new contract, his brow furrowed in that particular way that means he's found something worth questioning. He glances up and catches my eye. He winks. 6 years. And that still does the same thing to my chest. That is my family. The person who sat across from me in a midnight diner, drawing route maps on napkins, when the only thing I had was an idea and $400. The person who put his hand over my phone and asked me to trust him, because he already knew what I was only beginning to suspect. Blood is a biological fact. It is not a moral contract. You do not owe your peace, your earnings, or your soul to the people who raised you, if those people have spent your whole life treating your success as a resource they're entitled to harvest. If you are afraid to tell someone you have lost everything, that fear is not weakness. That fear is information. It is telling you that you already know, somewhere beneath all the hope you've been carrying, that they are not there for you. Greed does not need your help to destroy itself. My mother and sister did not need me to ruin them. They did it themselves, the moment they decided that photographing a document in my kitchen was worth more than the relationship we could have had. And finally, you are allowed to leave. You are allowed to build something beautiful without their permission, without their blessing, and without their presence. My name is Elena. I have $10 million in the bank, a husband who has always seen me clearly, and a grandmother's silver watch on my wrist that keeps perfect time. For the first time in 34 years, I am going home to a life that is entirely, unmistakably mine.